and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I'm Paula Ndiho, and joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
I missed you, man.
I missed you too, and you are definitely welcome back to, do they call it the home of the brave and land of the free?
Yeah, thank you. We'll get to that in a bit. A warm welcome to you. All our Facebook followers are watching us live from Washington. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself and ask him some pertinent questions, either about politics or issues that you are concerned about. Shaka, maybe before we start, I would like maybe to share just my experience having been gone for a couple of weeks.
That's true, and specifically where?
I was in Kenya. I started out in Nairobi, Kenya, then traveled to Mombasa. But along the way, I also visited Tsavo National Park, commonly known as the famous for the man-eaters of Tsavo.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Did you sight any of those very, very unfriendly lions?
Unfortunately, maybe the timing was not on my side. We didn't see any of those man-eaters. We drove around for like 2 hours and nothing, but we're able to see all the other different species.
That probably would have had to be the situation during the other time of colonialism, when the British were building what they characterized as the Uganda Railway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And the circumstances have changed since then. And from talking to the people that we ran into at the park, they said that around this time, the animals tend to go very far away because there's food, there's water everywhere. So you don't see a lot of them coming to places that are frequented by human beings. So if you really want to do a serious game drive, you have to go maybe 60 miles inside the national park.
And you told me that you had the opportunity to travel on this great Chinese-built technological railway.
My friend, it was a remarkable experience. I think the Chinese are up to something great. If not, they are putting, for example, Amtrak to shame here. I've had the pleasure of traveling on both, and I can comfortably say that I think what they did in Kenya is a remarkable example of what could be done for the rest of Africa. The train itself is very, very smooth. For a journey of about 500 kilometers, it takes about 5 hours, depending on which one you take. If you take the express lane, about 5 hours. If you take the train that stops within the counties, it takes about 6 hours. And the kind of infrastructure they build is incredible.
How come it's not as fast as the bullet train?
Well, there are several considerations for that. I think eventually they will make it electric, but right now the challenge is the power grid in Kenya is not as stable. So they have to figure out a way of maybe they've already put in place that capability of having it go electric, but for now it's operating on diesel.
What about the comfort?
The comfort level is remarkable, I will say that. I had an opportunity to travel first class. We couldn't get tickets for economy because they were sold out, completely sold out. And apparently people book months ahead. So it has literally reduced the travel period from Nairobi to Mombasa, which is to take about 9 to 12 hours, to just about 5 hours. So everybody is excited.
And what about the price?
The price is very, very reasonable. For a first-class ticket, you pay $30.
Really?
And you sit in the comfort of your living room.
That's just about the same distance, perhaps, between Nairobi, Mombasa, almost the same distance between Washington, D.C. and New York, isn't it?
Yeah, even maybe further. It goes further. It's because it's about 500
and it costs much less in a much better train.
Yeah, I think the Chinese did a remarkable job. Of course, there are challenges when you look at the environmental impact it is had on the national parks because it goes through the national park. There are those concerns, but they managed to mitigate some of those risks.
While you were on your assignment, you interacted with a lot of people, of course, on the ground. Did you find that they are aware about us, about Voice of America, Shaka Extra Time, or Straight Talk Africa, Africa 54, Africa News Tonight, and what have you?
You'd be surprised on one of the days, actually, when we were in the national park, guess what? I watched one of the shows. I watched Straight Talk here. And I also managed to catch up with Shaka Extra Time in the middle of a national park. So you'd be surprised. And you're a big fan out there. People love you. They like what you do. And I think what the Voice of America represents.
Really?
Yeah.
So what about the events that happen to this town where you know that some of the decisions, when they are made, sometimes they affect almost everybody globally? Do people talk about, for example, our president?
Oh yeah, there is a keen interest in President Trump, what he does, what he says. A lot of people are fascinated by our leader here in the United States. They want to know more about him. They want to know what he's saying, what he's tweeting. And maybe that's a good segue to transition to what just happened yesterday. The Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, raiding his personal lawyer. Your thoughts on that?
Very interesting. Of course, the fact that we're talking about Africa and we come from Africa, I don't think, perhaps with the exception of South Africa, and probably to a certain degree, Mauritius, and maybe, who knows, Botswana. I don't think, frankly, that there are many places on the African continent that this could happen. How can you possibly actually go and invade, if you will, forcibly enter into the residence or office of the lawyer of the president, the sitting president? And I think that really helps us to explain why, unlike most of the countries in Africa, in this America, the United States of America, the country is not run by an individual, however strong, however rich, however intelligent. The country is run by strong institutions. And I think that's really where it is the difference.
It's interesting to note that the significance of this, just these investigators raiding the president's personal lawyer, I cannot think of any other experience or something that I've seen in the recent past that is akin to that kind of thing.
Well, you could probably say that there was some kind of equivalent in terms of the context of South Africa when former President Jacob Zuma Mushorozi was in trouble, when his party, the ANC, was in fact recalling him to the extent that it created the conditions that forced him to resign. You remember that their type of police also invaded the Gupta family, the Gupta brothers. It happened there. And in fact, President Jacob Zuma was still in office. He was still in the Union building in Pretoria. So it can happen in South Africa, because South Africa, unlike most African countries, and we're talking about 55 African, countries which are member states of the African Union. But can you believe we can only talk about one country where you have, for example, the 3 independent organs or branches of government that in fact do the business of essentially checking and in fact making accountable their fellow institutions. You have a very strong independent, judiciary, for example, in South Africa. You have a very strong, you could say, legislature, which does not really operate on the whims of the executive. And yet, in most African countries, you have, yes, on paper, these 3 independent branches of government. But guess what? The most important, actually, institutional branch is the executive, which is headed by majority of them presidents, and others, very few prime ministers, head of government. When you look at the judiciary system and you look at the legislature, those 2 play the role, for the most part, that is subordinate to the executive, not in South Africa, and for that matter, not in the United States of America.
Are there any lessons that can be learned from this example, especially considering the point you just made about where these countries are led by presidents or executive prime ministers, but who really look at the executive as the only thing that matters, not the other institutions of government?
On paper, of course, they may be presidents, but when it comes to the reality of their particular situation, they're like demigods. Nobody can oppose them. They don't even allow, for example, the fourth estate to function normally. Here there is the fourth estate, which almost functions, in fact, in a way that it is also like another legitimate institution of the government.
But one could argue that until Trump came into power, things were maybe what you're trying to say, but things have changed since then.
No,
He's constantly criticizing the media.
He does, but that does not stop the media from doing its job. Mind you, Congress cannot make a law that makes the First Amendment redundant. The freedom of speech, my friend. The freedom of speech is sacrosanct here. And let's face it, it helps to make the people who are very powerful accountable to the people. And that's what democracy is all about.
Speaking about accountability, let's cross over to maybe South Sudan. Interesting developments in South Sudan. I don't know how many more wars can be fought, how many more rebels groups can be formed. As we speak now, the former army chief has just announced maybe yesterday that he's forming his own rebel force to fight the current government, which he was a part of, which he helped to build. Any thoughts?
General Paul Malong. This is a man, by the way, that has said he actually decided to create his organization so that he, for example, can help to restore democracy in the Republic of South Sudan. He can also help to crack down, for example, corruption, graft, and all that kind of stuff. He wants to end what he calls impunity. Can you believe that that is a man called General Paul Malong, a man who has actually been sanctioned by the international community for precisely what, in fact, he is claiming to be fighting against: corruption and impunity. This man represents perhaps nothing but violence, at least in the views of some of his critics. This is a man who was at the center of power from 2014 to 2017. He was the symbol of violence. This is a man who made it impossible, for example, for the IGAD agreement of 2016 to operate, to be essentially implemented and executed. This is why Dr. Riek Machar is almost like a political prisoner in South Africa. This is the man who is supposed to be the first vice president in Juba. This is the man that made it that, and now he can actually tell you and talk about restoring democracy. What does he really know about democracy?
Interesting. Let's go to a comment from Luke Breng in New York, who says he's from Juba in South Sudan and wants to know, how sure are you that the IGAD bloc will bring peace to South Sudan through U.S. sanctions?
I am not sure because, you know, if you look at what they took us, you know, last time, 2016, and they couldn't actually help to implement that deal. And since then, can you imagine how many lives have been lost and how many lives are being lost? You're talking about a country, honestly, which is so huge, so much blessed with wealth. These are people who actually are very few to the extent that they should actually be importing people to come and help extract, to come and help harness whatever God actually gave them. But right now, as we talk, almost half of the population either is internally displaced in its own country, meaning refugees in their own country, or they are refugees in neighboring countries, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and even ironically, in Sudan, Khartoum, which they said discriminated against them, and it actually did. But now they're actually running back there. Can you imagine? It's like there is nobody who is in charge of the socio-economic political store in Juba.
You know, Shaka, it's interesting. When I was in Kenya, I ran into a whole bunch of South Sudanese senior government officials languishing at some of these most expensive hotels.
Five-star hotels.
Yes, drinking expensive wine. But then you look back and say, what's going on in South Sudan? Why are these leaders fighting each other? What's there that everybody wants to have a piece of?
My brother, you're talking about only 3 words: resources, resources, resources.
At the expense of the ordinary person?
Precisely. I don't think, frankly, that even in their wildest dreams they think about them, because let's face it, I have been fortunate to be in Juba 3 times since they regained their political independence. You find almost no development there, but you find guys under 100-degree temperature putting on some of the most expensive Italian suits. These guys are driving, some of them are driving Hummer.
Very expensive cars.
Yes, they're driving some of the latest, frankly, on the technological cutting edge. And yet you find a lot of other ordinary, less fortunate compatriots living in subhuman conditions. So I am not surprised. These are the same guys, for example, who have very expensive houses in neighboring capitals. In Kampala, you can look at the houses, properties of a guy like General Paul Malonga. You can go to Nairobi in some of the most exclusive areas, look at properties belonging to President Salva Kiir Mayardit, Paul Mayong, and a lot of other colleagues. They have houses in Europe. They have houses here. And it is not only Southern Sudan, my friend, it is Africa. I have been fortunate enough at some point to visit some elite Nigerians who own some of the most expensive real estate in Potomac. Some of these guys were admirals in the army. They were senior military officers in the army, in the navy, in the Air Force. They became governors of some states and stuff like that. And when you go to those states where they were in charge, there's nothing.
That's a perfect segue. Let's go to Nigeria now. Obviously, President Buhari announced his bid for the 2nd term. Has he, as we speak, has he been a great leader? Can he pull it off? Or that remains to be seen?
I honestly think that Nigeria probably has been lucky so far since Buhari came to power, in the sense that he has at least tried really to expose and fight corruption. You know, when you talk about corruption in Nigeria, you're talking about malignant type of corruption. It's not benign. This is a malignant type of corruption. This is a story where someone at one time happened to be a minister of Finance. And he had actually gotten his graduate school at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And he had gone to a colleague of his with whom they had studied together. And this man was having the equivalent of that position in Malaysia. And when he found him there, he looked at that beautiful mansion, looked at some of these beautiful automobiles and what happened. He said, man, where do you get these from? And his colleague said, you come here. He looked through the window and he said, you look at those skyscrapers, you look at those highways and what have you, 10%, 10%. The Nigerian went back to Abuja. You know what he did, man? For him, when he outdid it. So when his friend from Malaysia returned a visit to Abuja, he said, man, what is this? I mean, I thought I was the man. You are simply too much. How did you do it? The Nigerian guy said, come here, look at the window. Do you see something there? The other guy said, well, I can't see anything. He said, 100%, 100%. Well, Buhari is not one of those. Buhari is an officer and a gentleman. In fact, he was overthrown back in 1985 when he was a military head of state, simply because he was trying to bring about something different. He was, guess who overthrew him? It was General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida and his friend Sani Abacha. And when you see what they did to Nigeria, my friend, you can do nothing but cry. Buhari is trying this. The problem he has is that his health is questionable because he spent his first term really almost about 4 or 5 months visiting hospitals in the United Kingdom and what have you. But the fact that he has decided to offer himself probably means he is okay. I think he's doing good, but people will tell you, man, Nigeria needs more than that.
To push back on what you just said, Shaka, a lot of his critics say that he has actually failed to curtail corruption, something that he ran very strongly on, that is still business as usual.
Yeah, but he has tried. There's no question about it, because let's face it, whether it is fighting corruption, whether it is democracy, you are not talking about an incident or an event. It is a process. People need to learn to be a little bit patient. The man is trying something, at least some kind of building block, and you can build onto that. When you go to some of these places, you go to Mina, the house, the mansion of, General Babangida, Badamasi Babangida. Man, it is huger than State House. How does he maintain that? The man has so much money in a lot of, different, secret, bank accounts and what have you. Buhari does not. Buhari is not a thief.
It's not about Buhari being a thief, but the system that he...
Yeah, but you can also look at the issue of Boko Haram, for example. Let's face it, he has not yet won the war. But there's no question that he has made a difference. By the time he came to power, Paul, the Boko Haram used to occupy a territory like the size of the kingdom of Belgium. They now hold nothing. They are now going back to being guerrillas. Hit and run. The man is trying. Yes, there is economic recession, no question about it. But I think it is part of the problem of Nigeria. It's not part of his problem, because you have to economically diversify. Nigeria has not done that. Nigeria used to be at one time a country, for example, which was capable of not only feeding itself, but even exporting food to neighborhood territories and beyond. But today, it's only depending on oil and gas. And you know what has happened? Pollution and all that kind of stuff. People who used to be aching a life after fish even can't fish. Those guys used to be farmers. They have no territory to farm. There is a problem. But I think he has tried, and he's trying.
Okay, so let's talk about what you're talking about tomorrow, Shaka, on Straight Talk Africa.
When you raise, that question, especially given what we are talking about tomorrow, I almost become very emotional, and perhaps rightly so. We'll be talking about an incredibly, remarkably gorgeous lady, an incredibly, remarkably smart lady intellectually, an incredible and remarkable lady who was a rebel with a cause. A person who has been characterized by many, by the way, as being even a rebel within a rebellion. She was very, very unconventional as they come. Winnie Madikizela Mandela. We'll be looking at her life. We'll be looking at, some of the most important things that she accomplished, and some of the things that she didn't quite accomplish. Some people call her a hero, and I'm one of those who definitely would allow that expression to go. She was a heroine, but even heroes are human beings. They have flaws. But when you look at her on the balance sheet, you will find more pluses than minuses.
How about, I share the same view, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the family. But there are those critics who say that she was not as good as she's been portrayed by the media.
To be honest with you, I don't know which type of media you are talking about, because you seem to give the impression that the media probably is homogeneous in terms of how it portrays people, and especially in this particular case, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. If you look at the African media, for example, in fact, even if you looked at the Washington, Post, She is portrayed like the heroine that she was. If you look at The Economist, you look at the New York Times and some other media, for some reason, they tend to focus and dwell on what appears to be not particularly friendly to her. But look, people talk about Winnie Mandela, they talk about infidelity and what have you, but they don't talk about the young Nelson Mandela. Mandela himself was not a saint. So why don't they put Mandela in the context, the kind of same context that they put Winnie Madikizela Mandela? Can you imagine a young lady, beautiful, educated, smart, loses a husband. She has 2 daughters. The husband is locked away and the key is almost thrown away. 27 years. But guess what? This young, beautiful lady basically kept that man's face, kept that man's name. She actually worked to the extent that she is probably responsible for actually helping him to become the face and symbol of the anti-apartheid struggle, probably more than he deserved. Mind you, he wasn't alone at Robben Island. He had people like Walter Sisulu, who actually recruited him to join the ranks of the ANC. Walter Sisulu is the father of another Sisulu who, as we talk, is the foreign minister in the Cyril Ramaphosa's administration. You had Govan Mbeki. Govan Mbeki was also a graduate of Fort Hare, like Mandela. He is the father of who later became the second president of independent South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. These were people who were senior and who probably could also have become the leaders, the face and symbol. But it was because of Winnie Madikizela Mandela that Mandela probably became what we see now, the Madiba.
Very quickly, what made Winnie Mandela stand out?
First of all, she was very courageous and fearless, very intelligent, very unconventional. Mind you, when you look at her background, she grew up in Transkei. She used to be a herds girl. She used to take care of the family cattle,
Goats.
the sheep, the goats, that kind of stuff. And at one time, she actually ran into kids like you. I know how you used to be a very stubborn guy when you were probably, young and what have you. And because she was a girl, the boy said, no. Our cows or our goats are the ones who have manifested access to water. She said no. She fought for her rights to the extent that these guys turned their attitude towards her and began to respect her. And when you see how she took on, this apartheid thing, I watched a movie, a documentary, The Last Grave of Dimbaza or something like that, when I was an undergraduate in upstate New York. I couldn't believe it. I looked at this woman and said, you know what? You are my hero.
Shaka, on that note, thank you so much. It was good to see you again and to be back here in studio. And to you all, our viewers, thank you. We look forward to another interaction next week. Keep those comments coming in. Until then, so long from Washington.
It's a pleasure, and I look forward, of course, to having some kind of social amenities with you of Nyama Choma.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Thank you.